Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Lovett.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
Favreau and Tommy are on vacation in Biarritz, making eyes with Justin Trudeau while Trump watches. Dan, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Look at this, another Jetsons-Flintstones crossover. It's what the people want.
That's your crossover episode go-to?
It is.
But like,
I don't know. Didn't Mad About You go somewhere once? Didn't they show up in places?
Yeah, I think so. There was Alf was on Gilligan's Island. There are a couple other ones. Empty Nest was on the Golden Girls. All kinds of big ones.
That makes sense. All right, let's move on. All right, today we're gonna talk about the new additions to Trump's long list of enemies, foreign and domestic. Now it's the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, let me start again, sorry. Today we're going to talk about new additions to Trump's long list of enemies, foreign and domestic. Now it's the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Jay Powell, who definitely had a rough Friday. We'll also look at Trump's escalating trade war with China and his decision to skip a climate change meeting at a tumultuous gathering at the G7 in France. Then we'll cover the Republican presidential primary, which is heating up. Dan, do you think it's fair to say that it's heating up?
It's hotter than it was before, so yes.
And the latest news around the Democratic race. Plus, we'll have Dan's interview with Ben Wickler, the new chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, on Ben's efforts to organize in Wisconsin, one of, if not the most important states we can target in 2020. Dan, I know there was one thing you wanted to mention.
Sure. So for all of our listeners who are in the Bay Area, on September 16th, Hallie and I are hosting a fundraiser for Raices with our friends from Airbnb at their headquarters here in San Francisco. At that fundraiser, I'll be interviewing Hope Fry, who is one of the attorneys who has been visiting the immigration facilities. As people listen to the pod know, Raices is an amazing organization that is working to reunite the separated families and advocate for immigrants, particularly those who are suffering at the hands of the Trump administration's policies. So for everyone who's in the area, I hope you can join us. I will tweet out the invitation and more details later today.
So go to that. Come. And then also on Thursday, I will be joined by Alyssa Mastromonaco, who will be filling in for Dan on a very special Thursday pod, which should be fun. But let's start with the latest on Trump's various trade wars and Twitter wars, because they're having very real consequences for the economy right now. You and John talked about it last Thursday, about the kind of increasingly unhinged musings of Trump around the economy. But on Friday, it did get worse. We woke up to news that China was adding $75 billion in retaliatory We woke up to news that China would be adding $75 billion in retaliatory tariffs. The Fed chair Jay Powell gave a speech where basically he said that the trade war was doing damage and the Fed was not the right tool to fix it. Trump found the perfect way to combine these two news events. He said, quote, "My only question is, who is our bigger enemy, Jay Powell or Chairman Xi?" Dan, were you surprised to see the president basically issue a threat to the Fed chair on Twitter, comparing him to a foreign adversary?
Well, I'm not even sure if it was a threat to Powell. I guess it was a threat to Jay Powell, also to China, and both. And the funny thing is, I saw that tweet, and then I saw that it had been deleted. And I was like, oh, someone got to Trump. They suggested that maybe it was a bad idea to label China our enemy and make the suggestion about the Fed chair. But no, he reposted it moments later because he simply had a typo, which in and of itself, I guess, shows growth from Trump.
It was a typo, so it wasn't a fit of pique. He went back and really made sure that he stuck the landing. It was an extraordinary... I do think it's... Look, I know we talk about Trump tweets all the time, but it really is an extraordinary document because it contains two very big parts of what Trump is doing at once. On the one hand, it is calling China an enemy, which is a big deal. And then on the other hand, it is this personal politics of threats and harassment that he practices now against the chair of the Federal Reserve, a position that is incredibly important in our economy that for a very long time was treated as sacrosanct, was treated as something at least in some ways apolitical, whether or not that's true, because there was a recognition that there's a lot of danger in getting our scuzzy political, getting our scuzzy partisan politics on the way the Fed operates, given how important monetary policy is to the economy. So let's take each one at a time. Dan, why is it a big deal for Trump to declare China an enemy?
It seems so quaint, like even thinking about this way, but there was this time where we spent all this time thinking and caring about the words that came not just out of the president's mouth, but out of any person who could credibly be labeled a spokesperson for the United States government, whether either that was Jay Carney or Josh Earnest or Robert Gibbs or, an assistant press secretary in the White House, and that anyone with White House in their title could cause international incident or markets to sink. And now, I guess now we know why. But the idea that, we're very careful what we call other countries. And then people have been very specific with China to call it either an adversary or a strategic competitor, because enemies are the people you go to war with. And, we can all decide that we don't care, that Trump isn't someone we should take seriously or literally or either one, but people in China see that, and it probably is concerning to them that the United States, with the most powerful military in the world and a gazillion nuclear weapons, thinks that China is an enemy. And so everyone has laughed it off and we paid little attention to it, but these are the kind of things that have mattered before, and we'll have to wonder whether they matter again.
Yeah, there is a sort of now the system seems to protect itself from Trump's words because we just don't take them as seriously. But it does seem as though there was regret on the part of the Trump administration. At the G7, Trump then struck a much more conciliatory tone in how he talked about China, how he talked about the Chinese president, referring to him as being, very capable, talking about the importance of making a deal. Now, there was this sort of mini kerfuffle around whether or not Trump had second thoughts about the trade war, and we can get to that. But do you think that even in his forget the explicit discussion of second thoughts, is there an acknowledgement that he went too far in just the way he addressed China during this meeting?
Yes, I think there is an acknowledgement, but I think he views the consequences of his statements not in the context of U.S. relations around the world, but in the very specific context of he needs China to help him get out of this mess, right? He banked his reelection on these glowing assessments of the economy, saying he's given us the greatest economy in the world, even though the facts do not back that up by any stretch of the imagination. And so I think he did a thing where he pushed really hard, sort of realized maybe I went too far, so I'm going to walk it back, but not because it's bad for the U.S., but because it's bad for Trump.
Right. So let's talk about hold on. So let's talk about what the other. Let's talk about the other ways in which he seemed to escalate this feud with China over the weekend. He issued a series of tweets in which he, quote, hereby ordered, end quote, American companies to look elsewhere from China. Immediately, people were very concerned about what he meant by this, if he meant anything at all, if it was a serious order, if there was some legal mechanism by which he could enforce this order. He then tweeted reference to a law which he claims gives him the authority to do things like this. It does seem as though someone made a mistake in teaching him the word hereby, because it seems as though he added that to make it sound more official. How big of a deal is it, Dan, that Trump is hereby ordering American companies to look elsewhere to look elsewhere than China?
Well, I think it says a lot about the moment we're in. We can talk about the specifics of the order that was hereby given, but he obviously doesn't have the authority to do this, and no one seems to be immediately shuttering their factories overseas. But I see a couple different dimensions. One is it must be noted that almost everything that Trump has ever sold with his name on it is made in China. And that still to this day, the Chinese government is bribing the Trump family by granting trademarks to his daughter, Ivanka Trump, who somehow has a line of goods that are still sold in China while working in the White House. So there's just a general lack of self-awareness there. The second part is, I do think we didn't, I know he can't actually order people to do it, but I don't know that the conversation around it in the media by other politicians fully grasp the gravity of the moment. I mean, Trump is at bare minimum, Trump is authoritarian curious. And here he is ordering the American companies to stop doing business in China, and we're all just pretend like, oh, he couldn't possibly have meant that. It's not that serious. We're just going to ignore it. But if we don't we have gone to the point where we're neither taking Trump seriously or literally, and that's probably a pretty bad thing for the country. Even if it was just what it says about the person in charge of the country right now, is that he is your crazy uncle that you just dismiss what they say at the Thanksgiving dinner.
Right. There's two pieces of this that I think are why it's alarming. There's the one piece of it you're describing, which is just not taking what Trump is saying seriously because, the law is murky. But once again, whenever Trump has sought to expand executive power in some way, this has been true around immigration, this has been true on a number of other issues, there's immediately this look at the law and whether or not it's possible. Trump tweeted out reference to a law that he believes gives him emergency powers to make these kinds of declarations over the economy. But the debate tends to resolve to, well, kind of, sort of, probably not. It would end up in the courts. And everybody just sort of goes along with that uncertainty as if that's an acceptable way to imbue a single very unfit person with a tremendous amount of power. The other piece of it is what it signals about the trade war and whether or not he views it as something that will end soon. So he's in Biarritz, and I love saying that he's in Biarritz because it's just a city I associate with like drunken Hemingway adventures, But he's in Biarritz.
I'm sure Trump has spent the whole time just catching up, rereading all of his Hemingway.
Yeah, it's a great time for Trump to dive into The Sun Also Rises, sort of like be in the place while experiencing what it was like in another time. But so as an American traveler,
The ugly American.
The greatest mind of his generation. Yeah. Anyway, he is in Biarritz talking about how he wants it to resolve, he wants there to be an end, he wants there to be a deal, while he's signaling to American companies for his own politics, and maybe because he also views this as a trade war that will go on for a long time, to start looking to stop doing business in China because of how extensive this trade war is going to be.
But it's also a temper tantrum, right? Which is he's out of options. He has placed his fate in the hand of the Chinese. He doesn't understand them. He doesn't understand what their calculus is, and he doesn't get that he's on a 18-month timeline right now, and Xi will never stand for election again and can be in charge as long as he wants. And it is like and sort of the going back and forth between threats and flattery goes to a point that you have made many times, which is Trump views this as a negotiation with a guy selling them marble for countertops, right? Which is he thinks he doesn't understand. He's doing one-dimensional negotiations, which is if I threaten them, then flatter him, then threaten them, then flatter him, then they'll eventually do what I want. When, the Chinese have 1,000 different interests at stake here, and he hasn't even begun to calculate, what would get them to yes.
Right, and there is also just this inherent challenge we have as a democracy, which is they're playing on a much longer timeline. They have greater tools at their disposal. Trump bristling at the Fed, Trump trying to order American companies to move their factories, it does go to the problem with this trade war that many pointed out from the beginning, which is China has a much different set of tools than the United States does. But he dove in because he never considered it at all. He didn't consider the long-term implications of this fight. He didn't consider very much of anything. He just did what it's a view he's had since 1985. It's frozen in amber, this idea that you need to fight China on trade.
1985 was a good term because 1985 was basically the year he stopped learning things. You can take back all of his views are sort of the views of an old rich guy in New York from the 80s.
There is a bookmark on page 13 of the very last book he tried to read, and it is very much where it was left in 1985. Dan, before we move on, there was a very important question that was apparently on the minds of Trump's that was apparently on the mind of many world leaders. This is what Trump reports. The question I was asked most today by fellow world leaders who think that the U.S. is doing so well and is stronger than ever before happens to be, Mr. President, why does the American media hate your country so much? Why are they rooting for it to fail? Dan, do you believe it was Merkel who said that? Macron? Who do you think is the one who asked such a pointed and honestly hard-hitting question for all of us to consider?
Was the other most asked question, President Trump, why are you so awesome? He is such a bad liar because he has now taken a lie that is so obviously not true, but he's also, there's only 6 other people, it's the G7, so there's only 6 other people who can ask him the question, so it makes it pretty hard to prove that, it makes it pretty easy to prove that he is full of shit.
I mean, I guess Boris Johnson could have in some way asked the question. It's not inconceivable.
I guess if there was one person who would do it, it would be the other authoritarian wannabe anti-immigrant world leader with bad hair of a once great nation.
So let's talk about the G7 for a bit. The Times has had, I thought, very delightful writing out of the G7, ever so gingerly, as if determined not to rouse the Americans' well-known temper. The other group of G7 leaders sought to nudge him toward their views. The other group of 7 leaders sought to nudge him toward their views on the pressing issues of the day, or at least register their differences, while making sure to wrap them in a French crepe of flattery, as they know he prefers. Though I don't believe he has ever allowed a crepe to enter his face. So now,
like a small child, he would lick the filling out.
Man, do you think that we've talked about Trump too much, like, in our lives? Like, what do you think we would have talked about for days on end during this period that Hillary Clinton won? Would we have had other hobbies? Do you think we would have taken up, I don't know, painting, archery? What do you think?
I don't know, solved climate change, cured cancer, watch more, better TV. I don't know.
So I think there was a signal event at the G7 that's worth talking about that I think captures this tension between the rest of the world and Trump at this event. There was a meeting to talk about climate change and the fires currently ravaging the Amazon in Brazil, in part as a result of the populist government that has taken power there and their disregard for environmental rules to protect a part of the world that sucks up carbon dioxide and provides oxygen for the planet, so a big deal. Trump skipped the meeting, claiming that he was busy because he had meetings with other leaders like Merkel and Modi in India. However, both of those leaders attended the meeting. Dan, why do you think Trump skipped the climate change meeting?
Because he's scared. He this has happened a couple of times in various G7s or G20s or UN General Assemblies where the topic is climate change, and the rest of the world agrees that climate change is real because it's only one half of our two-party political system of America who refuses to believe that climate change is real. And so it was going to be uncomfortable, and he seeks to avoid confrontation. So he hid out in his room and watched, I don't know, Fox, I assumed whatever was on Fox News at the moment. And it probably is, it's kind of funny that Trump is such a giant wuss, and for someone who talks so tough that he can't even defend his indefensible views on climate change. But the world is, as you point out, literally on fire. The world, and when the United States can't even show up to the meeting. It's like, when it's all said and done, if we ever get Trump out of here and reverse some of his policies and get rid of some of his executive orders, the most damage that Trump will do will be the opportunity cost of 4 to 8 years of dealing with climate change. 4 to 8 years we don't really have.
And the abdication of American leadership. We saw Trump basically issue bromides encouraging Brazil to tackle the fires and suggesting we'd help, as if this is a purely natural disaster Brazil is unequipped to fix, as opposed to something that the government has actively encouraged. And we've seen other leaders like Macron in France and others step up to try to pressure Brazil into doing the right thing. And the Times reported that even as Trump talked about how much comedy there was at the G7, how well these countries were getting along. And by the way, it is always so uncomfortable how much he personalizes even these moments, about how much basically describing it as a great time. And that's so important. It's so important that we had fun here and really had a blast. We wanted the meeting to last longer. We could have talked for another hour as if these personal relationships are that important, if it's based on his personal affection for these people. But behind the scenes, Trump administration officials were criticizing the G7 in France for focusing on niche issues. One of those niche issues was climate change.
Yes, the niche issue that matters to the entire fucking planet.
So, Dan, if there were an American president, period, if there was someone, if that job was filled appropriately by a full-fledged functioning person, what would that president be doing differently about the crisis in Brazil?
I think about this all the time because, when we worked in the White House, you're constantly faced with crises, and you often have a limited set of tools at your disposal to deal with it. And we were working on these, people within the government in the White House work on these things all the time. And I just wonder sometimes what the people in the Trump White House are doing other than retconning his tweets into policy. But so in this situation, right, so you have a fire in the Amazon that threatens the world, right? It threatens climate change, everything. You have a corrupt, essentially a dictator in Brazil who is unwilling or incapable to deal with the situation. How would the United States deal with this? It would have been not a meeting the United States skipped. It would have been a meeting the United States chaired at the G7. The president would be on the phone with leaders around the world, with the other G7 nations, but also in the region, marshaling support and putting pressure on Brazil to do something. And instead we're just sending tweets. And it is like this, like a lot of what's been going on in sort of Trump's Friday meltdown over the weekend is just this really crystallization of what has happened to America's leadership role in the world under Trump. And the consequences of it are serious. I saw on Twitter this morning that Bethany Frankel of the Real Housewives of New York is chartering a plane to go, like a tanker plane, to go spray the fires in some areas and try to help indigenous people. And people are cheering the fact that she is doing it because, it's great she's doing it, but also because no one else is doing it, right? Like, we actually need people from the cast of Bravo reality shows to step in and do the things the United States government would do, which is scary.
I mean, look, they are the real heroes. In a dark time. Well, it's also, Franklin Foer wrote in The Atlantic about the ways in which these fires are more dangerous than weapons of mass destruction, that basically this incredibly valuable global resource is being threatened by this one government. And you can imagine an order led by an American president who cares about this issue and who cares about working with allies on this issue, coming up with a way to think about these really important questions, about these international, let me say it this way, about these incredibly precious global resources that at a moment where we're on a hinge, these incredibly precious global resources at a moment where scientists tell us we're at a hinge point as to whether or not we can address climate change. You could imagine an American president leading not just on this one issue, but in thinking about these broader questions about resource use, about agriculture. One other point about this that I saw some people making too is one of the pressures on these fires is the fact that the trade war between the United States and China is putting pressure on agriculture in South America, that China, looking for supplies of things like soybeans outside of the United States, is creating pressure for more land, more places to grow crops, to find more arable land in Brazil. So there's all these unintended consequences of what Trump is doing. And by the way, the fact that there is a populist in Brazil is just another reminder too that this scourge of right-wing populism is genuinely threatening the health of the planet.
It is this. I mean, there's obviously connections between why we have a populist in Brazil, a populist in the United Kingdom, a populist in the United States, all at the same time. But it is this. You couldn't pick a worse time in in world history to cede some of the most important, influential governments, either diplomatically or militarily, or in the case of Brazil, literally in charge of the world's oxygen supply, to have these sort of knuckleheads at the switch, at this moment.
Yeah, and it's just worth remembering, too, that this abdication of American leadership, as many have pointed out, as Joe Biden has pointed out, that if we can get Trump out of office, we can make this period of time an aberration, not because we view Trump as an aberration, but because we can signal to the world that we recognize the mistake of Trump. But if we affirm him if we affirm him in a second term, the opportunity to send that message to the world is gone at an incredibly critical moment.
No one is ever going to be more popular than the first president who isn't Trump at the G20 or the United Nations.
They'll carry him in. They'll carry him in on one of those litters. All right, let's move on to domestic politics. The Republican primary has entered a new phase. There is a new competitor. His name is Joe Walsh, and he is going to bring the fight to Donald Trump. Dan, how worried do you think Donald Trump is and should be about former Congressman, Twitter persona, previous, quote, Obama is a Muslim, end quote, type guy running against Trump?
I don't think Trump should have any fears about losing the nomination. I don't think there's any chance that Joe Walsh is going to beat him. I mean, Trump has a 96% approval rating or whatever from Republican voters. The Republican Party, just to make sure that he would lose the nomination, canceled the South Carolina primary, which is the primary where conservatives, you generally have the best chance to knock off an incumbent. It was problematic for George H.W. Bush back in the day. And so he's not going to lose the nomination, and we shouldn't think that that's going to happen. But I do think he should be more worried about someone like Joe Walsh than either William Weld or John Kasich. William Weld is a doofus. He's a governor of Massachusetts. He was on the third-party ticket last time. He has no constituency in America, let alone the Republican Party. John Kasich is an affable, I guess, guy. He has some popularity. He did a few things that were not terrible in Ohio. He's a CNN contributor, but also no constituency in the National Republican Party. Joe Walsh is the first person who is making an attack on Trump from the right. And that, at least, I think is interesting and could have some political consequences down the line. Like, he was on he was on ABC this weekend during the Sunday show circuit, and he attacked Trump for not building the wall and not making Mexico pay for the wall. And that, I think, I was intrigued by that, and I'm interested to see where that goes, because that could have some political repercussions for Trump down the line, not in a primary, but in the general election.
So there was some effort on the part of Walsh to get George Conway involved in this fracas, and to me that signaled that this is very much a publicity move for Joe Walsh, because obviously getting George Conway involved is not about appealing to voters in swing states. It's about finding someone who will antagonize Trump the absolute most. I feel like there was two conversations happening on Twitter about Donald Trump facing a new Republican challenger. One was kind of I don't want to say openness, but at least a willingness to say, well, it's good that this person is doing this, it is good that a former right-wing person, even a heinous right-wing person, is willing to tell the truth about Trump, even if it's for their own purposes, even if it's to build a brand, even if it's ultimately to fund a right-wing campaign for the House. And then there was, I think, a more cynical take, one I think I largely agree with, saying this is a purely self-aggrandizing move to help one person gain traction and find a way to make income in the, commentary economy we have built after we closed all the factories.
I think I take an even more cynical take on this.
Exciting.
This debate, the don't normalize Joe Walsh debate, the don't normalize Joe Walsh argument, has been led by Shannon Watts of Moms Demand, who is someone we support a lot here at Public American, really like. And she is right. Joe Walsh is disgusting. He is a disgusting human being. He espoused disgusting racist views. I think he was at one point was a Sandy Hook truther. Obviously said horrible things about Obama. Really a disgusting person. And we should not take his conversion to anti-Trumpism seriously. We shouldn't. It's the same thing as anti-Scaramucci, right? These are grifters who find a market opening, they go into it to make money, and when then that closes, they look for another one.
Scaramucci wrote a book. He wrote a book about Trump, a pro-Trump book, in October of 2018. It is one thing to have a change of heart. You cannot write a book and then 6 months later say the opposite of the book. That's too quick.
I can almost buy someone who supported Trump in the election under this idea that he would somehow be a more serious president or would not, or that was a stupid position to have then. But if you decided after a month or two of Trump as president, this is not a good thing, he is even worse than we thought. But he was just as bad in September of 2018 or October, whatever the book as he is now. It was all part of a Scaramucci grift to support Trump, and when that door closed, he found another grift. It was anti-Trump, right? It's a better way for him to get attention. It's a better way for him to get on television attacking Trump than praising Trump. Walsh is the same way. My even more cynical take on it is, I agree, Joe Walsh is disgusting. I do not take him seriously. I do hope that there are some segment of voters who get to see Joe Walsh's message, right? Who are conservative but have questions about Trump. There are these universes of Republican voters who could be driven away from Trump, maybe not to vote for a Democrat, but maybe into a third-party camp where they may decide to sit the election out if they were exposed to an argument about Trump, which no one is making, and Walsh is making. So I do think there is some political upside to it, but I think we need to, and we should be this way with all of the sort of never Trump universe, right? Which is just we may agree with what Bill Kristol says about Trump now, but every other part of Bill Kristol's, just because the broken clock has stopped in the right place for right now doesn't mean we should support these people, and I think Joe Walsh falls in that category. But look, my imaginary super PAC would be completely above board and not engaged in anything, but another imaginary or real super PAC who was showing Joe Walsh making a conservative argument to Trump about Trump. Sorry, let me try again. Another super PAC, imaginary or real, who was showing some targeted universe of conservative or Republican-leaning independents a conservative anti-Trump argument. I'd be interested to see what impact that could have in an election.
As always, we end this segment by wondering where our billionaires are with the delightful above-board super PACs and less delightful subversive super PACs that we say we don't want, but secretly do. One other note on what's taking place on the right. Trump has increasingly been directing criticism at Fox News. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but what do you make of this? He was seemingly annoyed that Donna Brazile showed up on his television because he associates Donna Brazile with a very overblown attack he leveled against her and CNN for a long time around debate questions for Hillary Clinton during the primary. But it does seem he is in some ways frustrated with the way Fox has been covering him. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think he is feeling anxiety about, and I think it's economic. Trump is finally feeling the economic anxiety that pundits have falsely projected on his voters.
Yeah, sure.
So he is. So I think there is these nerves, and he is trying to circle the wagons, and it is evidence that Trump is. I'm sorry. This is evidence that he watches Fox too much, because Fox is so pro-Trump. You really have to watch it for hours upon hours upon hours to find a glimmer of anti-Trumpism, and because he's always watching it, he manages to find it. I would love to see some reporting on how the folks at Fox are reacting to this, because they have hitched their wagon to Trump, and it helped them in 2016 to get on board with Trump very early. And I don't know where they would go if they left Trump, or if these voters left Fox, but there must be, inside, there's not like there's an actual true news division, but somewhere in Fox, the people who keep the money flowing, I would love to know what their reaction is to Trump attacking them. Is it, how nervous does it make them?
Right. It strikes me as, look, he lashes out wherever he finds someone who has said something that damages his ego in some way, whether it's the head of the Fed or it's Fox News. It does seem to me that targeting Fox is one of those places where he can actually be far more effective. I don't know what personally attacking the chairman of the Fed will do, other than put a kind of battery acid panic in the stomachs of his loved ones. But it seems as though he thinks going after Fox is going to make them just a little bit more circumspect before they tell the truth to the audience they respect so very much. Okay, let's move on to 2020. This week is the deadline to see who will make the September debate. As of right now, 10 candidates have qualified. One candidate, Tom Steyer, is one poll away. That could be something he hits while we're recording. It could be something he doesn't hit. If Tom Steyer gets the qualifying poll, the fourth poll he needs, he already qualified on donors, that will mean ABC will go to a 2-night debate with 6 on one night and 5 on the other. Dan, sometimes I go back and forth. I obviously have a personal interest in there being a one-night debate because Lovett or Leave It is on Friday in New York that night. But when I actually think about it, whether or not there's a kind of lengthier conversation over 2 nights among smaller groups versus one night in which all the candidates are on one stage, I'm not totally sure which is better for Democrats. I'm not really sure which is better for Democrats writ large. What do you think?
I have gone back and forth on this too. So once the DNC, this has been this lingering question among a lot of people about if it was 11 candidates, would they just, add another podium in and just do it in one night? And the DNC was specific last week that they would make it 2. And my initial reaction was, ugh. I want to see the leading candidates on stage. I want to see Warren and Biden on the same stage, or Warren and Harris on the same stage. And so you can compare them, and maybe there will be some interaction. But that was my initial reaction. And then I thought about it for a little bit, and which I probably should have done before I tweeted. And
no, Dan,
I know.
Don't do that to yourself. Hey, you tweet whatever you want without thinking. It is 2019. Don't hesitate.
There are no consequences. But I now, in hindsight, think that my 2 nights would be better. It is September of the off year. This is not, we don't need blood sport where we have put the candidates on stage right now and one of the 2 front runners walk up. It's not the fucking Kumite, right? And it would be interesting to see
I didn't know what that meant.
One debate. You know what Kumite is?
What is that?
Have you ever seen the movie Bloodsport with Jean-Claude Van Damme? It's a classic 80s cable movie.
I don't think I've ever seen Bloodsport all the way through. I only know it as a movie Donald Trump watches on his airplane, but fast forwards to the fights.
It's only 90 minutes long, and it's basically it's very 80s. It's all fights and musical montages. It's
any dialogue,
an R-rated
any dialogue,
Karate
he's
Kid.
gone.
Yeah.
He's gone.
Yes. But anyway, so I think it would be interesting to have 5 5 or 6 candidates on stage together having a longer conversation, and hopefully ABC could, either extend the length of answers or get them more topics. And so I kind of think if just hearing more from the candidates now would probably be useful. I mean, so I rescind my original tweet, but I will not delete it.
Good. And don't apologize ever. Dan, I have to say, I am shocked, but I think that I agree now. I guess my actual view is it doesn't really matter that much ultimately, but I do agree that I would rather see longer, more substantive conversations over 2 nights. And I say that because and I say that not because I think the substantive debate will mean there's some more likely shakeup of who's supported versus who's not, but because the kind of cattle call debates we've been having don't seem to be moving the needle that much anyway. And so a good conversation is just a better outcome because we'll just hear more substance. We'll have a richer, deeper policy conversation as we move through these issues. The reason I say that is, so John Harwood reported this in July, actually, that in late April, a poll found that just 5 candidates, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and Pete Buttigieg, drew 79% of the Democratic vote. 6 weeks later, before the first round of debates, it drew the same 79%. This was from July. After the first round, just before the second, a Quinnipiac poll showed that those 5 drew 78%. And I went and looked today. That's basically where the vote share is now. But over the course of these several debates, the top 5 candidates have continued to be splitting around 75 to 80% of the vote. Now, things have moved about between those candidates, but this notion that getting on the debate stage and finally having an opportunity to be seen by millions more Americans will fundamentally shift the dynamics of the debate, that just hasn't happened yet. Do you think that that's... Well, yeah, sorry. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, we're thinking about this, I think, in the wrong way, which is we're 7, 8, 9 months, whatever it is now, from the Iowa caucuses, and the debates are they're the journey, not the destination to a decision, right? So over the course of time, they're going to get to see these candidates, I think, 12 times between now and I guess through the early primary contests, and people will get to make their decision. Like they're learning a little bit more, both good and bad, about all of these candidates, and then there will be an opportunity for the race to shift. Like on Thursday, when John and I were having this conversation about why the race hasn't changed, I went and looked back at the polling from this point, 2003, which is probably the most analogous Democratic primary to this one. And Joe Lieberman was leading in the polls, and John Kerry was in 4th, and Dick Gephardt was in 2nd or 3rd. And so there was, we're still really early in this, and people are learning, and they will either shift amongst those 5, or they will move to one of those other candidates at some point. And we don't need a debate in the summer of the year before to tell us who's going to be the. We just want people to learn more information.
And I think that also argues for having, I think, fewer people having more of a chance to speak. Now, another debate. Sorry, let me just skip that and just say. Now, another debate that has been taking place inside the Democratic Party is whether or not there should be a climate debate this weekend. The DNC held a vote. The climate debate lost. There will not be a climate debate, according to the DNC. Dan, this seems to be sort of the activists are furious about this. I think a lot of Democratic voters are angry about this. A lot of the candidates have come out in favor of a climate debate. Jay Inslee, I think, before he dropped out, led the charge on this because he was running on a climate platform. Why do you think the DNC is at odds with activists and I think some of the more energetic and fervent parts of the base over a climate debate right now?
I think the DNC is, throughout all of this, doing the best in a terrible situation. And so from their perspective, as I understand it, the argument it's not an argument against a climate debate specifically. It's an argument for an endless series of debates that take the candidates off the campaign trail and put them in a studio. Because it's not just the 2 hours of the debate, it's also the days of prep for the debate. And they're trying to find this balance. Like when we ran in 2008, there were like dozens of debates. It was a huge time suck. It was probably bad for the campaign. in 2016, there were not enough debates. They overcorrected in 16, so this is sort of the just right approach they're doing. And their fear is, if you say yes to climate, how do you say no to guns, right? So let's say all the activists who, after what happened this past week in El Paso with Dayton or anything else, or Mom's Demand, or everyone come together and say, we want to debate on guns. How do you say yes to climate, no on guns? How do you say yes to climate, no on a criminal justice debate? And so they're trying to hold the line. So I would make 2 points on this. One is the campaigns are acting as if they have no leverage here. And if the front runners, not Jay Inslee, who we miss, but not Jay Inslee, but if Biden, Warren, Buttigieg, Harris, Sanders decided there was going to be a climate debate, there would be a climate debate.
It's also,
in 2008, the front-running campaigns of Clinton, Obama, and Edwards, who was a person in American politics at one time, and the campaign managers would help sort of navigate all the forums and debates together. Because if one of them did it, all three of them had to do it, and if none of them did it, then it wouldn't happen. And so the front-runners could decide to have a climate debate, but they have decided not to do that. And so it's the DNC's fault, but right now a lot of the campaigns want to have their cake and eat it too and say, we are for a climate debate. But the DNC, hold me back. The DNC said we can't do anything, but they could do something if they wanted to.
Right. It does seem right. The interest of the candidate is to be for every debate humanly possible while hoping some other external force prevents them from having to leave the trail again and again. It's also true that there's going to be a climate change forum. And I guess the only let me say it again. It is also true that there's going to be a climate change forum. So that is also an opportunity to hear all the different candidates on this issue at length. But I do think, I think one of the problems people are having is that there's a kind of objectivity to the rules, which I understand, but just feels quite frustrating to people that wait a second, what are these qualification terms? Why is Tom Steyer able to get so close, but someone like Michael Bennet isn't? Like, I understand that these rules were drawn up before there were candidates so that they'd be fair, but is it actually serving the candidates best? Do you think overall the debate process this time has been working? What do you think?
I don't really know. Like, there are obviously flaws, right? The grassroots donor threshold seemed like a great idea at the time, but it has become a world where the campaigns have had to spend millions of dollars at a loss to try to meet these thresholds. And so there are unintended consequences to all of them. I just cannot come up with a better process.
Right.
I don't know what, certainly just a non-grassroots donation number or contribution number would be bad, right? So where you're rewarding people who raise money from large contributors, that would be bad. The polling should matter in some way, shape, or form, because what would we have done? It would have been worse if there had not been a 20 candidate cutoff for these first couple of debates, and we had 3 nights of debates, right? You're just getting fewer eyeballs or less interaction. And so I don't think there is an ideal way to do this. I think this is the right way to do it. I would be cautious about trying to overcorrect for some of the criticism going forward to make it harder to get into debates. I think that would be a mistake.
All right, we'll leave it there. Before we wrap up, another important development. Dan, Sean Spicer, he was White House press secretary. This is a job of great prestige. It is a job that has been lionized in film, in television, the voice of an administration standing at that podium. People work really hard to get that job. They achieve it. They go on to incredible things. Do you think Donald Trump was being sincere when he praised Sean Spicer for going on Dancing with the Stars?
No. I do not think Donald Trump is being sincere. And I think he sent that tweet because he knew it would make Sean Spicer's life harder. And torturing Sean Spicer is, other than golf and watching Fox News, one of Trump's few hobbies. Do you remember in the early days when Sean Spicer when Sean Spicer still worked there, and B, there was actually a White House briefing, that Trump would clear his schedule, watch the briefing in his office, and then demand that Sean Spicer come up there and then give him basically question-by-question critiques, all while making fun of the tailoring of his suit.
First of all, I would take issue with the phrase "clear his schedule."
Well, I mean, he had to DVR at least 2 Fox shows at that time, so something had to give.
To make one serious point about this before we go, though, it is so. The one thing that was always fascinating about Sean Spicer is when he was press secretary, he kind of wore his pain on his face and in his tailoring, but there was a kind of a gruesome expression he would draw when standing at that podium because of the space between the person he thought he was going to be and the person he had to be by defending Donald Trump. The distance traveled between being press secretary for a different president and being press secretary for this president. And it was fascinating to see Spicer kind of do this round of press saying, I just think this should be a politics-free zone, because there's still this desire on the part of people like Sean Spicer to be treated normally. That even now there's still this feeling like they know deep down that Trump is not a legitimate president in any meaningful sense, that working for him will always have an asterisk, that you're not a press secretary, you're a Trump press secretary. And it seems to me that the response he's getting to this is a reminder that as much as they want that to be true, that's just not the case. You can't evade responsibility and only take the parts you want, like the fame and apparently the ballroom dancing.
What do you think the calculus was in Sean Spicer's head to do this, right? Like, Dancing with the Stars is a refuge for B-list celebrities trying to resurrect their career. It is where the cast of Jersey Shore goes when Jersey Shore goes off the air. And so, like, I presume Sean Spicer, just on the Republican speaking circuit, selling access, has the capacity to make money in other ways.
Are you sure about that?
So,
are you sure? But, like, that's
I don't know.
interesting. Because, like, think about
there
the market.
There seems to be a lot of money going around Republican politics. Like,
yeah, but think about that market. Like, who wants Sean Spicer to come speak at their event? If you're just like, normally an administration, right, there would be, like, trade groups, nonpartisan organizations that might want somebody from an administration to come give them the lay of the land in Washington. People pay for that privilege. It is a long-standing, this is basically a version of what Hillary Clinton did when she gave high-paid speeches. They want the best person they can get to talk to them about politics. But you might not want Sean Spicer at your event where you talk about the latest in, I don't know, like retail packaging or health administration because he's so controversial. Nobody believes he had any influence. Nobody believes he's still talking to these people. So all the people trying to buy their way into Trump, they're going to Lewandowski. They're going to other people. I wonder if it's not more complicated than the book didn't sell. Yeah,
I mean, the book was interesting because he it is like no one has played their hand worse than Sean Spicer in this whole deal, right? Like, most of the people who got fired got no-show jobs at Trump super PACs and are just making, just getting laundered Coke dollars put in their pocket just to not, they're basically being paid to sign NDAs. So they didn't do that. Or they wrote,
by the way, just so people know, Coke dollars. I thought you meant Coke dollars, and now I'm realizing you meant Coke dollars.
Yes, yeah,
Sorry.
K-O-C-K.
Yep.
K-O-C-H.
Yep.
Maybe the other ones. Who knows? And or they either wrote these typical conservative selling books that Trump will tweet about that accuse about the fake press or fake Russian collusion, witch hunt, whatever else. Or they wrote tell-offs. And Sean Spicer managed to do neither. He did not write a book that pleased the Trump people, but he also didn't have the courage to tell the truth either. And so he's been living in this, some sort of sad purgatory of he can't figure out how to get himself out of the box he put himself in.
Yeah,
I would be very clear. I do not feel sorry for him.
No.
He is a grown, sentient adult who made a series of choices that everyone knew were wrong, and he knew they were wrong, and he made them anyway.
Yes, it is almost as if he's been sentenced to pushing his reputation up a hill, and then when it gets to the top of the hill, it rolls back down, so he walks back down to the bottom of the hill, and it seems like he may have to do that forever. Pretty good.
Seems fair.
All right, when we come back, we will have Dan's interview with the chairman of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, Ben Wickler. That was great. What an interview, Dan.
It was amazing.
We're in the outro. Join us on Thursday. It'll be me and Alyssa Mastromonaco. That'll be a blast. What else we have to say?
That's the pot. That's the pot everyone wants.
Finally, people are saying to themselves at the gym, on the toilet, or in their cars, wherever you get this. Bye, Dan. Have a great week. Have a great break.
Bye, John. Have fun with Alyssa.
Yep.
All right. Later, buddy.
Bye.